Hello, you guys. So, I've got a book review for you guys today, and it's based on Annie of Green Gables. I've read it many times. It was one of my favorite books in school. I'm actually reading it again, and I'm about halfway through. The book is 308 pages, and it's by L.M. Montgomery. It was written back in the time when they had horses and buggies, and I remember finding Annie to be one of the most relatable characters ever, and the writing of the book quite poetic. Now, it's the story of an orphan who basically arrives at this place on Green Gables and is taken in by this family, and it's kind of the tale of her growing up, kind of how she makes Green Gables her home, and her journey throughout living at Green Gables. And there's a whole series by it. I read L.M. Montgomery's Emily of New Moon series, Pat of Silverbush, Mistress Pat and Jane of Lantern Hill. All were good books. I like L.M. Montgomery as an author. She's very descriptive. Now, Alana, I picture as kind of being a small town. That's where the book is set. So Marilla and Matthew, they're two of the characters in the book. When they decide to adopt Anne, they're originally sent word through a friend to go to the orphanage and pick up a boy to help them on the farm. Well, it starts out with this character, Mrs. Rachel Lynde, in the first chapter. Mrs. Rachel Lynde is kind of described as a busybody, sits at her kitchen window looking out, kind of to see all the passerbys, and she sees Matthew heading down the drive in his buggy. She goes right over to talk to Marilla and finds out that they're looking to adopt a boy, and Mrs. Rachel Lynde says, "No, that's a bad idea. You don't know what this child will turn out like. That's an unheard of thing in their town." And so the second chapter, Matthew arrives at the train station and discovers that the orphan that they sent to get isn't a boy, it's a girl. Matthew is described as being horribly terrified of little girls. But he ends up, once he gets to know Annie on the ride back, kind of liking her. She's a talkative little thing, which I can relate to. I'm quite talkative myself. And he decides not to tell Annie they were expecting a boy and that a mix-up had been made. He decides to leave it to sensible Marilla to tell Annie. And once he gets back to Green Gables, Marilla is shocked to discover that Annie is, quite honestly, not a boy. Annie thinks she's going to be sent back, and she goes and she's crying. And she says, "I could work the farm. I could, kind of, I could be of help to you." And she goes into kind of a fit. And Marilla tells her not to worry. It's not like we're going to throw you out tonight. And she decides they're going to have to send her back. But they'll go to talk to Mrs. Spencer to figure out how the mix-up has been made before they decide what to do. But they definitely can't keep her because, they were expecting a boy. And they go and they talk to Mrs. Spencer the next day. And Mrs. Spencer is like, "Well, I don't know how the mix-up was made. I thought you wanted a boy. I was told that you wanted a boy from the orphanage." And then she's like, "Wait, but I know just the solution." Mrs. Hammond, who's described as being this mean lady who doesn't treat her employers or servants very well, is looking for a girl to help her with her baby. Now, Mrs. Hammond comes up the drive, and you can tell she just wants Annie to help her and do her chores and things like that. She doesn't really want a little girl, per se. And she's not particularly described as being nice, as I already said. And Marilla decides she's not the kind of woman to leave a sensitive child like Annie to. And Marilla, by then, has already heard a bit about Annie's history and has taken a liking to Annie herself, just a little. And she knows Matthew wants to keep her. So she tells Mrs. Hammond, well, I haven't quite made up my mind. And she goes back home to Green Gables to talk the matter over with Matthew. Or so she says. And when she talks it over with Matthew, they decide they're going to keep Annie. But they decide not to tell Annie that night because Annie will be too excited, Marilla says. And kind of like a kid on Christmas Day. I found that relatable. That kind of excitement where you stay up all night and you're happy. And so they decide to keep Annie. But Marilla says, but you must be good, Annie, if we're to keep you here at Green Gables. So the next day, after Marilla makes up her mind, she tells Annie, you're to pick up your clothes. And kind of sees that Annie's a good worker, listens, and is quite an obedient child. Marilla likes that, but she sees she gets distracted easily and is talkative. There's this chapter where Annie says her prayers, which is quite funny to me. She kind of shocks Marilla with her prayers a little. Not that there was anything to me very wrong about them, but in those times, things were done a certain way, and Annie hadn't really had much religious training, as Marilla put it. Then there's this part where Annie, Mrs. Rachel Lynde comes to visit and take a look at Annie. And she says something about Annie's hair, and Annie is quite sensitive about her red hair. She doesn't think it's very pretty, and Annie is vain, although usually not in a bad way. She's quite likable despite the fact that she's vain. And she goes off at Mrs. Rachel Lynde when she twits Annie about her looks. And flies off the handle, the part that really hooked me when I was a kid. Because nobody is perfect, and I kind of like that about Annie. And Marilla decides Annie's punishment is going to be to have to apologize to Mrs. Lynde. And Annie says, oh, no, I won't. Annie's quite mad, so Marilla's like, well, she'll have to stay in her room until she apologizes. Now, Matthew, when they agreed to adopt Annie, told Marilla, Annie's upbringing is going to kind of be up to Marilla. He won't put his oar in unless Marilla asks him to. And Matthew secretly goes up to talk to Annie to kind of help matters along without Marilla knowing. And Annie eventually, agrees to go apologize to Mrs. Lynde. And another part that I like is Annie's kind of first going off to Sunday school. I recall going to Sunday school a few times as a kid. And along the way, Annie puts flowers in her hats. Now, that, along with her flying off the handle, which people in the town had already heard about at church, definitely kind of... people think she's odd, to say the least. They'd already, heard enough about her that when she walks in with flowers in her hand, they heard that she talks to flowers and plants and thinks of them as her friend. They're kind of makes Annie the talk of the town. She's gonna be gossiped about a little, and Navana is quite a gossipy little town. Things get around fast in a small town. And then there's when she meets Diana. Now, I like Diana. She is the girl who's going to become Annie's best friend. And she's a bookworm, kind of like me. And Annie's so excited to have a best friend. You know, she's never really had one. And Marilla explains that if Mrs. Barry is really the one you have to worry about and not Diana, because if Mrs. Barry doesn't like you, you won't be playing with Diana. So she makes a friend in Diana, though, and I like their friendship. I find overall all the characters in the book to be kind of characters that captivate you. They're interesting and very relatable in general. You can find something you can relate into one character or another, or that they remind you of somebody that you know, kind of thing. Then there's Gilbert Blythe, and now Annie kind of has a, you know, they're gonna kind of have a romance later on. When he's in school, Annie hits him over the head with a slate, because he pulls her hair and he calls her red. Now, Annie's mad at him and she refuses to talk to him. They both get in trouble, and Annie hadn't really had a lot of schooling. It was kind of her first time in that school. Or in a school. And I remember that, like, the romance between Annie and Gilbert Blythe, and how Annie refuses to talk to him for quite some time. She's quite sensitive about her red hair. I like having red hair, though, I'll be honest. Now, a slate, for those of you that don't know, it is kind of like a chalkboard. It's what they used to write on back in the day, before we had computers and things like that, because now that's what we use at my school anyways that I went to. We used, like, computers and typed a lot of things out. But I can picture Annie just whirling around in her chair and just wham over Gilbert's head with the slate. Made me feel bad for more for Gilbert in that moment. He kind of reckoned with the wrong person. And apparently Gilbert he teased all the girls, and he didn't really mean anything bad by it. He's kind of really good-hearted and good-natured deep down. And there's quite a few stories without the book. I don't want to kind of cover everything. I think my favorite, I have a few favorite parts, but I liked when Matthew surprises her with the puffed sleeves. But I highly recommend reading it. There are a lot of chapters, but all the characters are relatable. The storyline is good. It's got a little bit of humor. And yeah, so like I said, Annie of Green Gables, I could talk about this book forever. But this video has already been 13 minutes, and if I keep going on, there's going to be nothing left in the book to surprise you guys. Because I could, like I said, I could go over every chapter quite vividly. It's definitely kind of portrays what life would have been like back then. And I think it's a book that surprisingly, in my view, has aged well with time. It's a classic. So, Annie of Green Gables. Bye, everyone.